Coming up on today's show, Dr. Stephen Furlich is the author of Nonverbal Epiphany, Steps to Improve Your Nonverbal Communication. He is also the best-selling author of a breakthrough book, Sex Talk, How Biological Sex Influences Gender Communication Differences Throughout Life Stages. He has taught and researched communication at the university level for over 20 years, teaching a variety of communication courses with the main focus of better understanding oneself and others. Dr. Furlich has been an associate professor at Texas A&M University since 2018. He resides in McKinney Commerce, Texas. Welcome to Loving Without Boundaries, where we hear inspiring stories, share actionable advice, and talk about the challenges and the joys of ethical non-monogamy and polyamory. I'm your host, Kitty Chambliss. Welcome back to Loving Without Boundaries, where I am really excited to be speaking again with Dr. Stephen Furlich, who is a prolific writer, and he's also written another book called Nonverbal Epiphany, Steps to Improve Your Nonverbal Communication. And I'm really excited to have a lovely conversation with you today. So welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed the last time, and thanks for your interest in this topic as well.
You're welcome. I love anything that has to do with communication and how we can do it better. So I appreciate you reaching out. And so I'd love it if you could just share with anybody who's not familiar with you, just a little bit about yourself in your own words.
So to begin with, I always had an interest in communication, and in particular, relationship communication. So my bachelor's is in psychology. And then my master's and graduate education is in communication, because I was much more focused on that than trying to diagnose different problems. So for this particular book, Nonverbal Epiphany, I've taught a nonverbal communication class for over 10 years at the university level, and I couldn't find a book that met my needs. So there's a lot of books out there and outside academia, popular culture on nonverbal communication, but I couldn't find any that were really heavily research-based. So if they're presenting information, how credible is it? But there's a lot of textbooks out there that are heavily research-based, but not as well as applied as what people could use to everyday life. So that's what I tried to do with my book, is combine the two. So I have over 700 sources that are research, but then I try to apply it through, I have 150 images that people can actually see and use in their everyday life. And then at the end of each chapter, there's an activity. So I don't want people to only become more knowledgeable about nonverbal communication, but I want them to be able to practice it and apply it in their own lives as well. So trying to reach that higher level of learning, of applying it in terms of understanding other people, and then improving their own nonverbal communication skills as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. That was very, very well said. And I'm curious, what is it about nonverbal communication that fascinated you so much?
One of the things that sticks out to me is, and there's different estimates out there, but I haven't found any credible estimates that state that's less than 50% of the overall communication. So everyone pretty much agrees, and research-wise, that out of all the communication, it's around 70 or 80% that's nonverbal communication. So what encompasses the majority of our communication, we know a little bit about in terms of awareness, unless you study it. So I guess that's a paradox. What encompasses so much of our communication, we just don't know that much about unless it's brought to our attention.
Mm-hmm. That really sticks out to me too. I don't know if you're a fan of the comedian Eddie Izzard, but he has in one of his shticks about, how most of our communication is what we're saying with our hands and, our body language. And it's only like this much what we're actually saying. And then another little piece is the way that we're saying it with our voices, so that makes a lot of sense and corroborates him as a comedian that he knew what he was talking about.
Yes. And that's one of the things also that sort of fascinates me, how the comedians tend to be out in front of a lot of things Here's one thing that it's in my book, but it's also a research paper that I'm going to the specific biological science behind it, is for years and decades, and this is nonverbal related, the comedians have known that they stand on the left side of the stage when they want the audience to laugh more, and then they stand on the right side when they do emotional appeals. So it's connected to the audience's visual field, and also that language is activated on the left side of the brain. So it's humor, whereas emotion is activated on the right side. So if the audience looks to the right, that's the right visual field. That's going to activate their left side of their brain along with language and humor. Whereas if they look to the left, both eyes, the visual field is going to go to the right side of their brain. It's going to activate along with their emotion as well. So don't doubt comedians.
Wow, that was fascinating. I had no idea. Thank you for sharing that. So yeah, I'd love to just start to dive in deeper. Like, what would you say is the important roles that nonverbal communication can play in relation, not only in relationships, but in other relationships in our lives? But it's sounds like it's got a huge impact. So I'd love to just start from there.
That's a good point, is that nonverbal sort of goes out to everything that we do. So relationships, non-relationships, whatever. And there's a lot of similarities. And that's one of the things I would like to start with, is that there's some principles that I highlight in my nonverbal epiphany book that applies to most people and most situations most of the time, and that people should understand how these principles apply to nonverbal communication and overall communication as well. So one of the things is that there's a mind and body connection. And I think often that people just see half of it, or understand half of it is what I should say. That nonverbal communication, a lot of times people think it as something that's reactionary, that we display a facial expression or do a gesture based upon what we hear someone else do, and it's our reaction. But what people don't understand is that it actually can create. So action can create emotion. So our nonverbal behaviors can create our emotions. And it's not just our emotions that are indicated through our nonverbal behaviors. So there's two different studies. One is, I cite her in my book, Cuddy Cuddy, and she talks about the power pose. And you can think of it as Wonder Woman used to do it, where you have your legs a little bit farther apart, you have your hands on your hips and your elbows out. And she did numerous studies. And in one study, they had people who are part of the experiment panelists, and they interviewed people, and they had the participants. Half of them did the power pose prior to the interview, half of them did not. And the people who conducted the interview didn't know who did it and who did not. And what they found was those who did the power pose were rated as much more credible and more likely to get the job, as opposed to those who did not. It's a physiological reaction that occurred from it. So when you have your legs a little bit farther apart, elbows out, it's an expansive posture. So it did two things, is what she found was it increased her testosterone levels, which made them more confident, and it decreased her cortisol levels, that's stress hormone. So what we display nonverbally influences our emotions. And then a second study was done, and they had half the participants put a pen in their mouth, and the other half did not. And then they rated what was their emotional experience afterwards. And those who had a pen in their mouth rated it as a much more positive emotional experience afterwards. Why is that? Because that created an artificial smile when they had a pin in their mouth, and it created that positive type of emotion that we do from smiling as well. So if you're in a negative type of mood, or you're not feeling as positive or unsure going into the interaction or even during one, if you change your nonverbal behaviors, that can actually change your emotions as well. Something else that is often misunderstood is that too often people rely too heavily on one nonverbal indicator. Someone rubs their nose, touches their face, doesn't make eye contact. They rely upon that and overgeneralize what that means. So nonverbal communication is like a puzzle. You're putting all these individual pieces of the puzzle together and then come up with some overall general conclusion from it. Everyone, or most people, tend to want oversimplification of easy answers to difficult problems, and the world doesn't work that way. You have to sort of play like a detective in relationships and nonverbal communication, put the individual pieces together, and then come up with some sort of informed decision from it. Something that people actually do get correctly is when nonverbal communication and verbal communication contradict, they often rely much more on the nonverbals, and those usually are a better indicator and more accurate than what people are actually saying. And then also you want to understand how the context comes into play. So it's not just the person, but the context. So the time, the place, the subject, and the other people around. How has that influenced it? And then lastly, how is someone not normally communicate non-verbally? And then when you communicate about something that may be serious, are they changing their nonverbal communication? And then later in the show, we could get into deception. So those are some principles to keep in mind is don't just rely upon one nonverbal behavior. Mm-hmm. Your behaviors can influence your physiology, and then the context, and then what happens when they contradict with their verbal, and then how someone normally communicate.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating stuff.
Nice.
You're really on top of it all too. Really
nice.
Articulate. One thing I'd love to understand better is how can one uncover clues about what's being conveyed without them actually saying anything? Like, what are some of those clues to look out for?
That's a good point, is that what's being said when someone's not talking. Mm-hmm. That's sort of play on words, I like to say.
Yes.
So one thing that pops in my head is that what is the true expression that someone has is usually what comes first and what comes quickest. That people don't necessarily control those micro expressions. So what you say something to me, my first reaction is usually what my true indicator of my intention and my emotion. What comes first and what comes quickest, and then maybe I mask it. Yeah, I change my expression. And then secondly is usually what's true starts on the left side of the face. And also, people usually believe someone when their left side of their face much more than the right side as well. Something else to keep in mind is, this has been around for a while. Some people may be familiar with it or not, but pupil dilation. So, Chinese jewelry traders have known this for centuries, that our pupils dilate when we see a new stimulus, regardless of what it is, right away. And then less than a second, our pupils contract if it's something that we dislike, or they stay dilated for an extended period of time if it's something that we like. So if you're having a conversation with someone and you say something, their pupils dilate and they stay dilated, then it's something that they like. If they contract, then it's maybe something that they dislike. Same thing with if it's relationships, or you meet someone for the first time, or romantic, or whatever else, same thing applies. One of the things to keep in mind is that when your pupils dilate and they stay dilated, the other person does as well, and they'll find you more attractive. So large organizations, advertisers, marketers, they tend to exploit this. So if you see an image, an online image, magazine image, if there still are that many magazines around, they artificially dilate the pupils of the models. And then your pupils are going to dilate when you see that. It's going to lead to a much more positive type of emotional experience from it. There's other things I could go into more detail in terms of deception and then specific behaviors, but I want to stop there in case you have some questions or comments.
Yeah, no, that was great, and I was smiling. Of course, the viewers can't see that, partly because it makes me think of some cartoons when the cartoon characters have like those big dilated eyes and they look so adorable and cute. It seems like that. And even Japanese anime, like it seems like they're picking up on that as well.
I never thought of that, but
and seems like you've thought of everything. I'm shocked. Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense to me that they're also mimicking that, just like you said, the advertisers do as well. Yeah,
maybe cereal boxes for kids.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. So yeah, especially with the work that I do with relationships, there can be sometimes infidelity or cheating.
Yes.
And feelings of, is this person telling me the truth? So I'd love to hear more about what's the secret formula to detect when somebody's lying, or just hear a little bit more about that.
That's a good question. And again, everything is a pieces of the puzzle that we put together, but there are some pieces that are more reliable than others. So professionals, how accurate are they in detecting deception? Interrogators, maybe military, police officers, FBI, whoever else who are trained, they're 60%, around 60%. So just a little bit over, just a guess of 50-50.
Wow.
Because they have not read my book. No, I'm just kidding.
No doubt.
But there are things that people can do to improve their accuracy of detected deception. So one thing that is relatively reliable, and there's one caveat to it, just because not enough of these people have been studied. That's right-handed people, that what I'm about to say is a caveat, but it probably applies to everyone. It's difficult to find a bunch of left-handed people to study. So one thing that they found was that if someone, when they're recalling something, if they look to the left, then that's often a strong indicator that they're being much more truthful, because they're activating the right side of their brain. Right. And if they look to the right, that's often an indicator that they're being untruthful, or they're being deceptive by looking to the right, because that's activating the left side of the brain. So I always teach our students that left is literal, because that's much more factual. And then the right, looking to the right, if that's what they do, then that's a bit more trying to be fabricated. People often furrow their eyebrows at the beginning. One thing that most people who are unfamiliar or less familiar with nonverbal communication think is that someone does not make eye contact. That indicates deception. But what researchers actually found is the opposite, that people actually maintain eye contact for longer periods of time when they're trying to be deceptive. That probably have all these things out there, popular culture, TV shows, and movies, that teach us that people avoid eye contact when they're trying to be deceptive. So they overcompensate that, and they maintain eye contact for longer periods of time. And they overcompensate their behaviors as well. So we talked about understanding how someone normally communicate, what's their baseline, ask some basic questions of weather, sports, news, and then go into what you want to find out about and see if there's a difference. And what the research has found is that people overconstrict their behaviors. They do fewer nonverbal behaviors, and they do the same ones repetitively over and over than what they normally do when they communicate. One thing that is a pretty good indicator is that people try to control their face, and they do that much better than other things. So if you watch poker tournaments on TV, what does everybody have? A hat and sunglasses on. So what researchers found was the strongest indicator of how confident someone is with their hand, literally, is placing their bets with their poker chips. So the extremities, they don't control those nearly as much. So when they use their hand to move their chips towards the middle of the table, how confidently do they see? So when you're having a conversation with someone, look at their extremities, their hands, but then also their feet usually tell. So if they're facing you and one foot faces you, but they have their other foot towards the door, they don't want that conversation that they have with you. They're looking for that exit because they want to exit the conversation literally as well. So their extremities often give a strong indicator. And they're less spontaneous as well. So what types of behaviors that they do display aren't as natural as what they usually do. So again, understanding how do they normally communicate on their baseline. And then lastly, biological females are much better at detected deception than what males are.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating too. Why is that?
There's different biological reasons for that, and one of them is that they have more biological females have more P cells in the retina, and that's for detail. It's also for color. So maybe looking at color changes of someone's facial expressions, but also the micro expressions we talked about in the details. But one of the things that actually wasn't an epiphany for me for this book was that question itself and the biological reason. That's another piece of the puzzle, not but another piece. Biological males have much more connections within each hemisphere. Biological females have more connections across both hemispheres. What that allows biological females to do is to engage in the conversation while at the same time access other areas of her brain that can analyze the nonverbal behaviors of the person at the same time. Whereas with males, being much more compartmentalized, we could do one or the other, but expect us to do both at the same time aren't nearly as equipped. biological females also have a much larger, more active, and more gray matter in their insula. And what that is, it takes in sensory information, processes it, and makes some sort of informed decision about it. So you have more sensory information to go off of, biological females do, than what males do. And it's been found rather consistently, and I have a whole chapter about this in my previous book, Sex Talk, that females, they're superior in all 5 senses. So again, they have more information and more detail to go off of from communication interaction that takes place.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that is fascinating. That's fascinating. So thank you for explaining the difference between the genders biologically. That is truly remarkable. And so
I guess if you're ever in doubt, have a biological female nearby, and then she could give you better insight. And that's one of the things that's also been found in research is the more people that analyze someone else about deception, the more accurate it increases as well.
So the best way to do it is to have your posse of biological women and
yes.
get as many of them as possible.
Yes. They're better at sending nonverbal behaviors, mm-hmm. messages more accurately, and understanding other people as well.
Mm-hmm. That's really amazing. One thing that I was thinking of in terms of relationships, like when we're thinking about dating, we might be trying to, persuade somebody to go out on a date with us. So how does nonverbal communication align with persuasion?
Okay. So, in terms of dating itself, and when you meet someone for the first time, chemo signals often play a major part. Mm-hmm. And these are those types of odors that we give off at a more subconscious type of level that people aren't aware of. And there's been numerous studies found that biological females, they tend to sniff out biological males that have a different genetic makeup because everybody has recessive genes. And you don't want to have 2 people with similar types of DNA makeup and increase the chance that their recessive genes are going to be expressed that are usually detrimental. So it's usually the biological female that sniffs out the biological male. She gives some sort of subtle cue that biological males often do not pick up on, and it frustrates her, such as standing closer, touching her hair, slightly touching him. And then after she does that, she expects him to take the lead role after that. So some of the things to keep in mind is what are some of those subtle cues with flirtation that people often do not pick up on, and it's longer periods of eye gaze, pointing your feet towards that person, standing closer to them, doing some sort of self-grooming, maybe with touching your hair or something else. And then also another indicator is this person interested or not? And this is rather consistently and rather reliable, is mimicry. So if another person mimics your nonverbal behaviors, then that often indicates that they have a level of interest with you and they empathize with you much more so as well. So healthier relationships, if you look around next time you're at a social gathering, if the couple, if they mimic each other's behaviors, then it's much more positive behaviors. That's much more of a positive relationship. If they're totally off nonverbally, expressing different types of nonverbal behaviors from each other, then there's probably more than likely trouble that's going on as well. Because what mimicry does is, one, it activates similar areas of the brain with each other, and that helps you empathize with the other person as well. You understand them at a much deeper level, and it's a good relationship barometer. Something else, touch. When you the use of touch increases oxytocin levels in relationships, so it plays an important part. So if there's a lack of touch or a decrease in the use of touch in the relationship, then that's going to hinder the relationship, because what touch does, it increases the oxytocin level, which is that bonding chemical. So you can see how that plays an important part. So there's been numerous studies done with the importance of touch and oxytocin, and decades ago, there were orphanages where children without parents there was a high mortality rate. They had all their basic needs being met. They couldn't figure out why. And then they finally figured out that they weren't being touched enough, being held. And now they start to incorporate that. And then the mortality rates start to decrease. A real kiss versus a fake kiss. This younger generation, I don't understand them. But there was something on YouTube that the researchers did that people meet for the first time and kiss. And for a romantic kiss, you turn your head to the right. And then half the time that you meet someone for the first time is not a romantic kiss, you turn it to the left is what they found. So that could be an indicator if you're in a relationship and then now all of a sudden your partner's turning their head to the left, that maybe there's something that's going on as well.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's amazing. It's very fascinating. Another thing that I think that can come up in relationships is wanting to exude like confidence or certainty. Is that something that can show up in I'm sure it can show up in our body language? How does that get conveyed?
Yeah. So one thing that can indicate that maybe you're more confident. I write about the golden ratio. And the golden ratio is the 1 to 1.618. It's a relation of certain things to each other. And I go into more detail in that of an actual walk and stride that you can do based upon the golden ratio that will make you more attractive. They even found out that avatars, so something that represents yourself virtually, if you walk more confidently, then people find that avatar much more attractive as well. Something that's been rather consistent for pretty much everyone is wearing the color red is often perceived as much more powerful, more confident, and also that biological females find it much more attractive, a biological male wear red than a different type of color, or if the biological male just stands in front of a red background. Female servers, if they have red lipstick on, they get higher tips. If they touch, they get higher tips. If they wear a red shirt, they get higher tips as well. So colors can do it as well. Looking more confidently, maybe a slower walk, taking up more space as well.
That makes sense, everything that you said there. And then on the opposite of that, like what about when like say couples are having an argument and like if there's anger present, is there a way to either notice somebody's body language that shows that they're angry, or also a way to kind of de-escalate a situation using body language or, facial expressions?
That's a good point. So I guess what happens if it's not going as well? One thing that indicates a sign of aggression is that much longer period of eye contact. That's often a sign of aggression. Furrowing of the eyebrows as well, raising the voice, standing closer to someone, all those types of things. So how to de-escalate it is maybe not maintain the eye contact nearly as long, and probably to stand your ground as well. That's not to let someone else, walk all over you. So one of the things that I address is prior to the coronavirus, we use touch much more so, the handshake. So there's different types of handshakes, and the power handshake. The power handshake. So the handshake came around centuries ago when people used to wear those long cloaks. And you used to shake the other person's forearm to make sure there wasn't some sort of weapon or dagger that they could stab you with. And then eventually it evolved to shaking the other person's hand. And what that does, it increases the oxytocin level, a bonding chemical with the other person. But there's jerks out there. And sometimes they want to do a power handshake to do a power play on you. So what happens is the person who has a power handshake is that their palm is face down. And a submissive handshake, their palm is faced up. So what that does with your palm faced up, it exposes that very vulnerable vein of yours that's very difficult to turn off if someone were to cut it. So what you want to do is when you shake hands with someone, if they're by your side, you usually want them on your left side. And then you reach across yourself, and then naturally your palm goes down. Naturally, they reach up, and their palm is up. if it's face to face and they try to give you a power handshake, then touch the top of their hand or touch their arm or touch their shoulder, something much more intimate, and that helps to lessen what type of power that they try to do. There's numerous YouTube clips of politicians using the power handshake, and there's one when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. She met with some world leader somewhere. They walk out of a building. He's on her right side. She takes 2 or 3 steps, realizes that, and then she steps in front of him, circles around, and then stops before the photo so that he's on her left side so that she can reach across to her left to shake hands with him to have the power handshake for the photo. So it's not just something that is does this mean something or not, but people strategically and intentionally look at it. Same thing with Trump. There's numerous clips of him doing the power handshake with different leaders. When he met with that North Korean leader, you can see how he used the power handshake, but also something else that people aren't aware of, holding the door open for someone and then holding the door open for someone and then sticking your hand out to show them the way, and then maybe doing a light touch on their shoulder. You're controlling their nonverbal behaviors. You're telling them what to do. You take the power position because you're the one in charge. Trump did that when he met with the North Korean leader. He was always letting the North Korean leader walk in front of him. He always had his hand out, showing where to go, giving him a light touch on the shoulder, and steering him and controlling his behavior. So that sets the tone who's in charge.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Sure.
So I'm really, really enjoying everything that you're saying. And
Thanks.
another thought popped into my head, which is, what about with somebody who's blind? Like, if somebody can't actually see, and I don't actually have any idea what you're about to say here, but how it feels like they would really, it's another way that they'd be so handicapped, right? I mean, obviously they're handicapped because they can't see, but I guess they still have the senses of smell and touch, but I don't know if that's a question that's ever come up before.
Something that's been studied is with blind children even, that they laugh at things that are funny, and especially when other people laugh. So one thing in nonverbal communication is emotional contagion. That oftentimes what one person's emotion is, people around them catch those as well. So positive and negative emotions can be caught by other people. So that's something that's universal for all people is emotion. And it's that 5 to 7 different emotions that everyone experiences: the happy, sad, fear, surprise, contempt, anger. And it's based upon different individual differences just slightly, but then cultural differences as well in terms of how do you display those. So everyone experiences those, but everyone's going to display is slightly different. So that's one thing would be emotional contagion. And then also how we touched on the use of touch for oxytocin, and then also that bonding chemical. And then they did a study, and they had a curtain up, and they had people on 2 different sides of the curtain. They reached their hand through it so you didn't see the other person, and you felt the other person's hand. And again, no competition at all. Biological females outperform biological males in terms of identifying the other person's emotional state through touch alone. So through the use of holding hands, someone can get an indication of your emotional state, and they're highly likely to catch on to your emotion as well through emotional contagion as well. And then vocalness as well. So how we communicate, I have a whole chapter on vocalics and how your voice, through everything but the words themselves, communicate the majority of your message. So the rate, the pitch, the volume, the pauses, how all those things influence it. So oftentimes speakers, professional speakers, they stop, they do a pause right before something that they think is much more important than everything else that they have to say as well. So using those vocal indicators as well with that person.
Awesome.
That was a good question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it just came up while we were talking. And another thing in terms of relationships, I know that there's science behind if a couple is displaying some form of contempt, that it's highly likely that relationship isn't going to work out. So we've talked a lot about how healthy relationships are when we're conveying attraction. What about ways that we convey contempt with our body language or our facial expressions?
So one of the things that I has been around for a bit, but people aren't nearly as familiar with, is that the smile, and determine whether it's a real smile or a fake one. And there are different things that research has indicated to find out if it's a real smile or not. So a real smile, it lasts longer to create. There's much more symmetry on both sides of the face, so it's not just one side or the other. The cheeks are raised much more so, and you have those wrinkles by the eyes that people often think of as the crow's feet, and those are indicators that someone is being much more genuine with their smile as opposed to a fake smile, and they often show the top of their teeth. Whereas if someone's showing the bottom of their teeth when they're smiling, that's either a fake smile or it's much more for laughter itself. So trying to put those pieces together, the biggest indicator is that the crow's feet, the wrinkling on the sides of the eyes, and also having much more symmetry indicates a real smile from a fake one. Also, when when you see someone for the first time, even if it's someone you're familiar with, unfamiliar with, or whatever, once they get in your visual field, if they're happy to see you, subconsciously in less than a second, they do an eyebrow flash, and that's been universally found. And it's been found for decades and across all cultures as well. So they raise their eyebrows and lower them in less than a second, and that indicates that they're happy to see you. And that's probably because what that does is it opens up their visual field much more so. Something else that has been found as a much more positive type of indicator is having a head tilt. So having a slight tilt of your head during a conversation means you're much more engaged in it and much more positive, because what does that do? That exposes part of your neck. And exposes part of your neck, that's that vein, that's very difficult to shut off if it were to get cut. So it much more vulnerability of yourself and much more positive to the other person. And then some things that most people are already familiar with, those open and closed gestures. So not having the arms crossed or the hands in front, but also what people are less familiar with are objects. So oftentimes when someone is less positive communicating with someone else, they often put objects in front to create some sort of barrier, cup of coffee, laptop, cell phone, whatever else. So when I interact with someone, I usually try to have all these types of objects to the side and not having something in front. So the real smile from the fake smile, we talked about pupil dilation. Are the pupils contracted or are they dilated? Mm-hmm. These open and closed gestures. Then we talked about deception as well. All those could be indicators.
Mm-hmm. This is really, really amazing stuff. So I just want to stop for a moment and just say, thank you for all of this incredible research and putting it all together, and for your time here on this interview and kind of consolidating all of it. And it's also, very clear that you're highly prepared for our conversation. So I appreciate that as well. And I see that genuine smile on your face as I said that.
Oh, thanks.
Is there anything else you'd like to share that is maybe a question that I didn't ask you, or who you think this book might be for, or, whatever you'd like to kind of round up our conversation with?
I guess one of the biggest takeaways from it is awareness. And I think for various reasons, our society, not just our society, but I think people today are less aware, maybe because we rely too much on technology or what else. So not only a lack of awareness of other people's behaviors, but a lack of awareness of our own behaviors and how people perceive us. So that's one of the biggest things I want people to take away from it, is to not only understand what our own behaviors indicate to other people, but to empathize and understand from other people's perspective and not just from our own. We always try to process information, or a lot of times from our own perspective, but we don't see it from how other people do it and what their emotional types of experiences are. So that's the biggest takeaway from it, is the empathy, understanding of ourselves and other people.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I often say that I feel the root of all evil is a lack of empathy. So I love that that's kind of the Quan, is that understanding the nuances of our nonverbal communication can create empathy for other people, as well as understand better how we're perceived. So thank you for that. That's
There's
really
one
amazing.
thing on that. Just because you said that quote, the root of all evil, lack of empathy or whatever, during the coronavirus, crime tended to go up. People were wearing masks. So what happens with emotion? How do you understand someone else's emotion? You see someone's facial expression, and what happens is your mirror neurons are activated, and what that does is it prepares your body to display the same facial expression as the other person. So what happens, you understand someone else's emotion by mimicking facially very quickly the other person's facial expressions, and then you actually experience the same emotion as the other person. So maybe when everybody was wearing masks, you weren't able to mimic their facial expressions, so you didn't empathize with them nearly as much. So therefore, it's much easier to cause harm on someone who you don't feel their pain because you don't go through the exact same experience emotionally as what they do. Mm-hmm. I just threw that out there. That's sort of a guess.
No, that totally resonates with me and makes sense based on all the research that you've been sharing with us. So thank you for that so much. I really, really enjoyed the conversation. I'm really excited to dive deeper into the book and just really honor all the hard work that you put into this. So where can other folks find your book? And I just want to say the name of it again, Nonverbal Epiphany, Steps to Improve Your Nonverbal Communication. Love that. So where can people find your book and reach out to you if they'd like to speak to you?
Thanks. So the easiest way is just go on Amazon and then just go to the books category and type in my last name, Furlich, Furlich, and then it pops right up. You can do it ebook, paperback, or audiobook, which is not my voice. And then also I have a website, and it's drstephenfurlich.com. And that's one of the things that I find most gratifying. If someone reads my research, it then reaches out to me, and it's something that they personally can identify with and their own personal experiences that they can relate to and improve themselves. So that's one of the biggest satisfactions I get from research, is when people can apply to their own lives and improve it. So if we can not only improve relationships, but reduce conflict and understand other people much more accurately, then it makes it all worth it.
Totally makes it all worth it. I really love the way you sum that up. And for anyone listening, Stephen is spelled Stephen. So thank you for everything that you've shared here. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm happy to have you back on. It's fun to have you for the second time. So I'm happy to continue the conversation with you at some future time, but I appreciate everything that you've shared with us here today.
Okay, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it, and I'm glad that we were able to touch on some topics that people are less familiar with.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you heard, are struggling with some aspect of your relationships, and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit to work with me as your relationship coach, here's what I invite you to do next. Head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. That's lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply, and book a call to speak with me. I'll get on the phone with you for about 45 minutes, and we'll get you crystal clear on 3 things. Number 1, exactly what's not working well in your relationships right now. Number 2, ideally where you'd like to be and what might be getting in the way. And number 3, the exact strategy to get you there, helping to close that gap. Remember, creating healthy, open relationships does not typically happen by itself. Many often need expert guidance to make it happen. We've helped clients all over the world to feel safe, happy, and secure in open relationships, while not losing their mind or their cherished partners. To see if we can help you do the same, head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. I'm Kitty Chambliss, and let's talk soon.